In this program, you will learn about the world 500 years ago and what three groups of people were doing: the Europeans, Africans, and the native peoples of North and South America. You will also discover who the first European navigators were to set foot on the North American continent and why they came. You will find out who the conquistadors were and the Vikings. As you're watching, think about what it would have been like to sail into the unknown 500 years ago. In May of 1497, after months of preparation, John Cabot was ready to set out on his search for the unknown water passage to the Asian continent. He set sail under the English flag in a small vessel called the Matthew, with a crew of 18 men. To determine the speed of his boat, he threw wood chips into the water from the front of the ship and timed their journey to the back. It was an inexact method at best, but somehow he managed to stay on course. 5 years earlier, in 1492, Cabot's rival Christopher Columbus had set sail in 3 caravel ships named the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, with a crew of 90 men to seek out the eastern coast of India. His voyage was financed by Queen Isabella of Spain. In nearby Portugal, Prince Henry busied himself orchestrating expeditions of his own. Commissioning the best shipbuilders, map makers, and captains he could find, he assured Portugal's king and queen that the quickest way to reach the Indies was to find a passage along the coast of Africa that would lead them into the Indian Ocean and the riches of the East. Such was the age of exploration and expansion at the turn of 15th century Europe. The monarchies of England, Spain, Portugal, and France were in a heated race to discover the water passage that would deliver them to the Far East. The precious jewels and gold of the Orient and the valuable spices and silks of India were objects of wealth and power to the ambitious kingdoms in Western Europe. The country that could find a way to get there by boat instead of the long, difficult journey by land would be able to dominate the thriving trade and increase their power and influence at home.
I think the drive for expansion does come from the competition, the very near competition associated with half a dozen to a dozen nations at any given time in close proximity to each other, all looking over each other's shoulders to see who's gotten where, how far have they reached, have they found the passage to the east.
The voyage that Columbus thought would take only a matter of days to complete stretched to over 2 months, when on October 12th, 1492, a small island in the Bahamas was spotted on the horizon. Columbus was convinced it was one of the islands in the Indies. He named the island San Salvador, which means Blessed Savior. Assuming the people on the islands who ventured out to greet them were indeed the people of India, he called them Indians. In his captain's log, he wrote of his first encounter with these native Indians as well-built, with good bodies and handsome features. They do not bear arms or know them, for I showed them a sword. They took it by the edge and cut themselves out of ignorance. They have no iron. Their spears are made of cane. They would make fine servants. Believing he had successfully landed off the coast of India, Christopher Columbus had no idea that he had accidentally stumbled across 2 enormous continents populated with millions of Native American people. At the time of his arrival in 1492, most of the tribes throughout North and South America were primarily reliant on farming as their greatest food source. In many regions, agriculture and storing food were the basis of civilizations as advanced as those in parts of Africa and Asia. These original native inhabitants of North and South America had evolved over thousands of years into rich civilizations with complex and diverse cultures. One of the most advanced cultures to arise in the Americas around 1000 BC was the Maya, who lived in the lowlands of southern Mexico and Central America. The Maya created large stone ceremonial centers with numerous pyramids which were constructed with extremely sophisticated architectural techniques. They were also advanced in their study of astronomy and were capable of predicting solar eclipses. They invented a calendar which was more accurate than the one being used in Europe at that time. Another powerful group were the Aztecs, who arose from a group of traveling warriors. Legend tells that a high priest instructed them to form a settlement when and where they came upon a sign in the form of an eagle perched on a cactus eating a serpent. They found their symbolic sign on an island in the middle of a lake in Mexico. It was on this island that they built their city and named it Tenochtitlan. The Aztecs continued to grow in power as they conquered tribes around them, and soon became the most dominant people in central Mexico. The Native Americans that inhabited the northern regions near the present-day United States and Canada did not possess advanced civilizations like the Maya or the Aztecs, but did exhibit a wide variety of cultures, some with highly organized societies.
The Iroquois are a good example. They've got a strong political organization and links between different tribal groupings. They're what anthropologists call chieftain societies, okay? They already have a political structure.
On the east coast of North America were many tribes that were related to one another. Around the time of Columbus, 5 tribes joined together to create the League of the Iroquois: the Oneidas, Onondagas, Cayugas, Mohawks, and Senecas. The League was created in an effort to end the warfare among the tribes, and it remained in place for several hundred years. When Christopher Columbus returned from this magnificent new world in 1493, he was treated like a hero. He returned to Spain with Indian captives and tropical plants, animals, and fruits from the islands. He boasted about the fertile paradise he had discovered and promised great riches for Spain. This age of exploration and expansion was born during a period when the people throughout Europe were witnessing a social and intellectual awakening now known as the Renaissance, a time of new ideas and creative invention in Europe. Merchants, craftspeople, and storekeepers found their skills were of special value, and eventually the first middle class began to develop. Above the middle class were the church leaders and nobles, and below them were the peasants and serfs. At the very top were the monarchies, the kings and queens, whose passion for power spurred the need for expansion. Growing up during the Renaissance, Giovanni Caboto benefited from the spreading interest in learning and the arts. Like Columbus, Caboto was born in Genoa around 1455, when Italy was at its peak in power and splendor. Being the son of a merchant, it was natural that Caboto would want to enter the trade business. He was very interested in navigation and believed the world was round, which meant to him that the rich spices and goods from Asia could be reached by going north, then west of Europe to get there. But on the far western shores of Europe, Prince Henry of Portugal was mapping a different route. Prince Henry believed that the Atlantic Ocean on the coast of Portugal was the best way to get there, by sailing south along the coast of Africa to find some waterway or shortcut through the African continent, or to sail completely around the southern tip of Africa and then up the eastern coast to the Indian Ocean. Each year he set off on a new journey, filling in his maps, setting up trading posts near African kingdoms, and returning to Portugal with ships filled with ivory, gold, and African slaves. The people on the African continent, with advanced civilizations in Egypt, shared many of the characteristics seen in the advanced cultures of the Americas. Egypt, who had created magnificent kingdoms, pyramids, and pharaohs, was a rival with the quickly rising Roman Empire developing just north across the Mediterranean Sea in Europe. Like the Native Americans, many African tribes did not leave behind very much in the way of written documents or records of their civilizations and cultures, but they created powerful kingdoms and were active in local and international trade. Most Africans lived in small individual villages, like their counterparts in the Americas, and were hunters and farmers. Chiefs or elders would normally exercise control over villages which were closely bound to the agricultural cycles of planting and harvesting. Throughout Africa, a wide variety of empires, kingdoms, and city-states rose up before 1450. A section known as Southern Nubia began to flourish along the Nile River south of Egypt and became an important trade center.
In the beginning of the 1500s, Africa's major role with regard to exploration, European exploration, was as a trading partner. The religion of Islam had spread throughout the northeastern portions of Africa and some portions of the west, and with that came the trading relationships between southern and Mediterranean Europe and African people. The goods that Europeans most wanted were gold, ivory from the tusks of elephants, and eventually slaves for labor.
Giovanni Cabato also dreamed of finding the elusive route to the legendary Oriental kingdoms of Asia and India. He traveled first to Spain and then to Portugal to find funding for his expeditions, but failed in both countries. His last real hope was England. So, in 1496, Cabato moved with his family to the British Isles and changed his name to John Cabot. He raised all of the money for his trip from wealthy merchants. From King Henry, he sought only a seal of approval and permission to sail under the English flag. King Henry signed Cabot's charter and agreed that Cabot could claim all the lands he discovered in the name of England. In 1494, Spain and Portugal had signed the Treaty of Tordesillas. The treaty, in effect, divided the Atlantic Ocean along an imaginary line running north to south. All lands to the west of this line would belong to Spain, while all lands to the east would belong to Portugal. Since King Henry of England never signed the treaty, he planned to claim lands north of Spain's explorations on the same latitude as England. After 5 long weeks on his voyage aboard the Matthew, Cabot and his crew of 18 landed at what is believed to be the Newfoundland coast. Like Columbus, Cabot thought he had succeeded in reaching the Far East when he had actually failed. Although Cabot never reached the Asian coast as he had dreamed, he encountered the magnificent North American continent, formerly unknown to the outside world. He had reached the shores of the New World and given England a claim to the pristine continent the other monarchies had been boasting of. Also, Cabot's routes to Newfoundland and Nova Scotia were bursting with fish. Within a few short years, British and French merchant fishermen would swarm to the area.
They get into boats and they catch fish with lines offshore, then they bring the fish on shore and dry them, and then they pack them on the ships at the end of the summer, take them back to Europe. And that fishery fed millions of people for hundreds of years, right through into the 19th, well, really even into the 20th century, and made millions of dollars or pounds or escudos or reals or whatever for various European countries. Indirectly, too, that fishery leads towards the settlement of North America.
In fact, if Cabot had never sailed for England, the United States may not exist as it is known today, for its laws, customs, and its language are derived from the first English colonies, financed largely by the profits of the Newfoundland fishing industry. 500 years before Cabot's voyage, in the year 1000 AD, legendary stories tell of a European by the name of Leif Erikson as the first European to actually set foot on the Americas. According to a legendary Scandinavian tale called Eric's Saga, they found wild wheat and grapevines. Every stream was teeming with fish. In the woods there were a great number of animals of all kinds. To Erikson and his sailors, having grown up in Greenland, it seemed a paradise. They named it Vinland, land of grapes.
And it's pretty clear from various accounts, not just the sagas, but other actual economic accounts that have come down from Greenland and Norway in that period, that the Greenland Norse actually went on exploiting North America for a while after they had discovered Vinland. They never set up a colony here in North America the way they set up a colony in Greenland itself. I think it was a little bit too far. Besides, there was competition. There was serious competition here in the form of native people.
Many people in modern times came to think the Erik sagas were based on myth and not history. But in 1960, Viking settlements dating back to the year 1000 were discovered in Newfoundland. And because grapes do not grow there, historians believe there may have been other settlements closer to New England. But these discoveries prove that the sagas are more than likely based on fact. The sagas offer us the first glimpse of the Americas as seen through the wondering eyes of Europeans who reached its shores 5 centuries before Christopher Columbus and John Cabot. As Cabot was returning from his voyage to Newfoundland, Columbus was making arrangements for yet another trip of his own. Undeterred by the fact he had not found the actual coast of India, or the great riches he dreamed of, he embarked on a third voyage in 1498, this time traveling all the way to the mainland on the coast of South America, which he believed to be another Asian world south of China. When he made his return to the island of Hispaniola, there were many reports that Columbus found the colonists near rebellion and abusing the Indians. Many of the colonists fled home to Spain and told the king and queen of Columbus's poor governing. King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella felt Columbus was to blame for the rebellion, the failure to find more gold, as well as the poor treatment of the Indians. They sent a ship to collect Columbus and brought him back to Cadiz, locked in chains. By this time, Cabot was preparing 5 new ships for his next voyage. In May of 1498, he set out for his second and last expedition.
All we know about that expedition is that one of the ships returned without ever crossing the Atlantic. We don't know what happened to the rest of the expedition. There's a 16th century English historian with the strange name Polydore Vergil, and Polydore Vergil says the only land that Cabot discovered on that voyage lay at the bottom of the ocean, which is kind of a cruel way of saying that he may have sunk. We don't actually know that. All we know is that he disappeared.
In Spain, Columbus proved to be very persuasive in his conviction that he was close to finding the route to India. And finally, in 1502, he was able to talk the king and queen into letting him take a 4th voyage to the west. This time, he traveled all the way to the Central American coastline, looking for a passage of some sort that would lead him further west into the Indian Ocean. But he never found it, and he retired the rest of his years very disappointed, but always believing that he had indeed reached the Indies. What Columbus and other European monarchies did not know was that Portugal had secretly found a passage to India by sailing around the southern tip of Africa. In 1497, a captain by the name of Vasco da Gama followed a map made by one of Prince Henry's pupils, crossed the Indian Ocean, and reached the western shores of India. He returned to Portugal with spices, jewels, and silks purchased for very low prices. Portugal kept this trade route a secret for many years and soon had trading posts from India to the Spice Islands. The small kingdom of Portugal became the envy of all of Europe. The Spanish monarchy and its ambitious explorers became more determined in spreading their expansion effort after Columbus had established the colony on Hispaniola. Also, the Catholic Church in Spain insisted that it was Spain's obligation and duty to spread Christianity to the native peoples of the New World. This and the allure of gold were the forces that motivated Spain's conquering explorers, the conquistadors.
Cortez conquers the Aztec people and takes over Mexico. And Pizarro is the conqueror of the Inca and takes over Peru. They were both ruthless explorers. They were both determined, as explorers before them had been, to find wealth and power both for themselves and for the countries they explored for, the countries who sponsored their expeditions.
Perhaps the most famous conquistador in all of Spanish history is Hernán Cortés. From the Spanish colony in Cuba under Cuban Governor Diego de Velázquez, Cortés was appointed general of an expedition to Mexico. He organized 11 ships and 500 soldiers. But once on the shores of Mexico, Cortés decided to renounce the orders of Governor Velázquez and instead marched his soldiers inland toward the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan. Along the way, he made an alliance with the Indians of Tlaxcala, traditional enemies of the Aztecs. Cortés fooled many into believing he was the god Quetzalcoatl. The Indians had always believed that this legendary white ruler would return to Mexico from the east. By the time Cortés arrived, the great Aztec king Montezuma was too awestruck by what he had heard of Cortés to organize a resistance. And Cortés and his soldiers walked into the Aztec capital Tenochtitlan unopposed in November 1519. Cortés wrote that it was the most beautiful city in the world.
He knew he had found exactly what he was looking for because Montezuma offered him gifts, he showed him gold, he was a very good host initially. And Cortés knew this was the perfect opportunity to take advantage of the situation and used his soldiers to plunder the Aztec people until they were extremely weak, at which point he ordered that their city and temples be torn down and that a new Spanish-style city be built in its place.
Soon, Spanish ships filled with Aztec gold and treasures sailed to Spain from its new empire in Central America. Cortés was given the title of Marquis de Valle de Oaxaca and continued many more conquests in Honduras in 1524 and Baja California in 1536. The Spanish Empire was further expanded by another famous conquistador named Francisco Pizarro. Pizarro formed a partnership with another conquistador named Diego de Almagro and began to explore lands to the south of the Indies. Their first expedition reached the San Juan River in Colombia before being forced to turn back. Their second exploration between 1526 and 1528, after experiencing famine, disease, and a rebellious crew, reached the Santa River in Peru and returned to Panama with gold, cloth, and llamas. The governor of Panama refused further explorations, and Pizarro decided to sail to Spain to appeal directly to the king. The king agreed with him and laid claim to all of Peru, including its subjects and its treasures. Pizarro was made a Knight of Santiago and governor and captain general of the conquered lands.
By and large, the Spanish conquest of Central and South America was made at the expense of the native peoples. Their cultures were disbanded, their buildings, their cities, their temples were left in ruins. Many of them were enslaved, many of them died in slavery, working for their Spanish conquerors to extract gold and silver from mines. There's no question that these native cultures were prevented from flourishing because of Spanish conquest.
Other Spanish conquistadors began to push north into what is now the United States. Ponce de Leon, who had sailed to America on Columbus's second voyage and had claimed Puerto Rico for Spain, went on a quest to find what the Indian legends described as a fountain of youth. He explored the peninsula of Florida, which he named and claimed for Spain, and set up the first settlement on the continent, calling it St. Augustine. The daring voyages and dangerous adventures of these early explorers paved the way for future expeditions. Waterways and navigational routes were penciled into existing maps for the next explorer to follow and improve upon. With the discovery of the Americas, the European pursuit of trade and expansion would only continue. America appeared early on as a land of great opportunity, just ripe for the picking. To review, 500 years ago, European monarchs and merchants hired experienced navigators to help find them a water passage to the riches of Asia. John Cabot sailed for England. Christopher Columbus sailed for Spain. Spain's conquistadors plundered the people and resources of South America. The Vikings, or Norse people, sailed to North America 500 years before Columbus.